Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and we are joined once again by football finance expert Kieran Maguire. I'd say friend of the channel by now as well. First of all, how are you doing, Kieran?
I was looking forward to a nice quiet day. It's not. But
No.
apart from that, it's all good.
Then Manchester United had to go and announce a new 100,000 seater stadium, which we're going to be talking about. We'll also be talking about some of those comments on Manchester United's current financial situation in a minute and kind of how those two things stack up. You know, the cuts and then this sort of lavish, once-in-a-lifetime spending that United are doing. Let's start off with the stadium then. That's today's news. 100,000 seats, £2 billion is the cost that's immediately been associated with it. I want to talk about the regeneration project and this 7.3 billion figure as well. But for now, on that 2 billion, they've said that they don't think the stadium itself will be publicly funded. How do you think it is likely that the stadium will be funded?
I think you've got to look at a variety of sources. Manchester United borrowed a lot of money under the Glazers, as we know, in 2005 for the leverage buyout. And in those days, Manchester United was generating probably about £170 million a year. It's now looking at 650. So Manchester United has grown spectacularly since then. So it can take on more debt. I appreciate that from many United fans' points of view, it's a very sore subject. But when they borrowed under the Glazers, Manchester United got nothing in return. Whereas if you're borrowing to fund a new stadium, as we've seen at Spurs have tripled the money they're making from ticket sales. They've tripled the money they've made from their commercial activities. And on the back of that, they've gone on to become far more competitive. So it will be a combination of borrowing. I think you're going to have to get some money from some of the shareholders. This could be a sensitive topic, as we know that Manchester United's shares are traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So will some of this come from Jim Ratcliffe? It's a possible. Will it come from the Glazers? Almost certainly not, given their history. Could it come from a third shareholder? Could they say, well, somebody wants to buy 10% of the club on the back of this? Probably unlikely, but never say never in the world of finance. So where it's coming from, it will be a challenge. They'll certainly have to borrow some. Could they go down some of the routes that we've seen at the likes of Real Madrid, where perhaps they do borrow money, sort of, but the person that they borrowed the money from gets 5%, 10% of gate receipts for the next 30 years? There's lots of complicated things. There's lots of creative things that can be put together to overall provide the funding for the 2 billion cost. I think another concern is we're saying 2 billion now. I've never known a quote go under budget. They all tend to go over. We've only got to look what's happened in the last 10 years. We've had Brexit, which has put up costs. We've had COVID, which we put up costs. We've got Ukraine, which has put up costs. And we're living in a pretty uncertain world at present. So I think that would be a tricky one to negotiate.
Just a quick question before we move on to the next main question. This is completely different from the PSR amount of money we can spend. There's no limit on the money that can be spent on this. That won't affect our ability to buy players in the transfer market, will it?
It won't from a PSR point of view. The only issue would be is Manchester United owe almost £400 million already in unpaid transfer fees for players that they've signed in recent years. Now, would I, as a lender, be keen for that to continue? The answer is probably no. So it could be that the lenders might say, well, if you want to borrow money at 4% interest, you need to get that £391 million down to less than 200. If you don't, then we're going to charge you a higher rate of interest. But certainly during the period in which the stadium is being constructed, all of that interest doesn't go into your PSR calculations. And when the stadium is up and running, you've got additional money coming in you've got the extra seats. It's going to be a multifunction stadium. We've seen Spurs have signed up for 30 non-football events with their local council. Well, given the reaction of Manchester City Council and the government, you would assume that they're going to get a green light if Manchester United want to go down that route. And it would be fairly daft if they don't go down that route, seeing that they want it to be a big top stadium. We've seen this strange sort of design. Potentially that can be used for not just non-football days, but non-summer days as well.
Yeah, just on the debt angle, because as United fans, we're so kind of sensitive to the word debt because of, like you mentioned, the way the Glazers bought the club and the fact that none of that has been paid off. In fact, the debt seems to be higher than ever, and we've spent a load on interest in the meantime. Would this debt be coming from banks? When people, you either go to a payday lender or you go to a bank for a loan. Is that where it'd be from? Would we be getting investment from businesses? How does debt in this sort of instance work? Would it be the same people that we currently owe, the 300-400 million on? Like, do you know how that would work or how it could work?
It would effectively be probably something what we refer to as a loan note.
Okay.
Where Manchester United go to a bank and they say, or they'll go to a group of banks and they might say, we want to borrow another million, another billion, so another billion and a half, and you get 4 or 5 banks who will say, okay, this is what we're prepared to lend on the back of that. This is the rate of interest we're going to charge. So that tends to be the sort of the traditional approach. I don't think Manchester United will go down the same route as we saw with Everton, when they were lending from very strange organisations and ended up paying ridiculous amounts of interest. The stock market in New York simply wouldn't allow it, and Manchester United shareholders, I think, would pour scorn on such an approach. So, yes, it is a sensitive subject from a Manchester United fan's point of view. It's going to increase the debt, that's no doubt. But if you talk to Spurs fans, they say, look, we've got this fantastic new stadium. We can see the benefits. It then comes down to how well the remaining budget is going to be spent in terms of what you're seeing on the pitch. And that, I think, is the biggest criticism that can be levelled at both the Glazers and potentially at INEOS to date as well.
When you look at the size of the stadium, I was looking before, it's basically the size of Anfield plus Stamford Bridge on top. Two of the biggest sort of 4 or 5 teams in the country. It's the size of both of their stadiums put together. It is an astonishing size of 100,000 people. Do you see the way Tottenham have seen these increase in prices? Will we have to see that? Or is there a chance that because of the increased sort of infrastructure around the stadium, because of this, per person spend that they expect to go up with the new infrastructure, and also new tickets, more tickets, is there a chance, do you think, that the tickets can remain reasonable, or do you see no way that they don't, go through the roof in terms of pricing?
Well, if you look at Jim Ratcliffe's comments a few weeks ago, he was saying he felt it was wrong that Manchester United fans were paying less than people at Fulham. So if I'm a Red who's been on the Stretford end for the last 30 years and I'm from Whalley Range or Urmston or Gorton or somewhere like that, I think I would be a bit concerned, because when you talk to Spurs fans, they've all had to stump up a lot more. West Ham did show that when they moved from Upton Park to the council stadium in London, the Olympic Stadium, their prices didn't go up, but then they were moving from mid-30s to over 60,000, and that was part of the deal. That was part of the sell to the fan base. Spurs is a 21st century stadium. It is future proofed, and you're paying 21st century prices. You might get United saying we're going to keep back a proportion of tickets for local fans, but I think you will find that proportion of tickets is actually quite small compared to the overall number that be available. And again, if you're a United fan who is on that season ticket waiting list, you're thinking, well, an extra 26,000 tickets potentially available. Does this mean that more season tickets will go on sale? You look and see what's happened at Anfield. They've gone from 45,000 in 2016 to 61,000 now. Very few of those additional seats have gone to season ticket holders, because club owners know that the people who are members, who sign up for that membership scheme, they are willing to pay more. And that's not a criticism of them. They're United fans or Liverpool fans or Chelsea fans, whoever it's going to be. A, they're prepared to pay more for a ticket. B, they're more likely to buy a programme or its equivalent. And C, they're more likely to go into the megastore and empty out their wallets, because it's an experience that they'll get once or twice a season, and they will spend accordingly. If you're a local, you're not doing that. You're not buying merch every week, and the chances are you're going to the pub with your mates who you've been going to see United play for the last 20 or 30 years, and you want to retain that unique experience that brings with being a United fan and being a local.
Yeah. On the fees and the money again, sorry. Would it be possible, I'm not saying they will do this, but theoretically could INEOS take on that debt and take on that loan as a company and then give United the money and pay that off themselves? So yes, there is debt being incurred, but to save it being put on Manchester United, could INEOS do that, or is that too many hoops and it's just completely unlikely?
It could be done, but I think it wouldn't make sense from INEOS's point of view. INEOS have already borrowed an awful lot of money. What INEOS could do is that they could use the fact that they are held in reasonably high regard. And we've seen this at Everton, that the new owners have come in and they've effectively guaranteed the loans. So it's a bit like being, if you're buying your first house and your mum and dad say, well, you've not had a mortgage before, we will guarantee your mortgage, you can borrow at a lower rate of interest. My only concern there is that INEOS's credit rating itself has deteriorated in recent months, and Jim Ratcliffe, again, he says some things which I think he says for effect, but they tend to come back to bite him. He's saying that Europe's being deindustrialized. Well, if I'm a lender, I'm going to go, well, do I want to lend cheaply to a company that's in a deindustrialized part of the economy? So it can possibly work, but I don't think there'd be many savings. And ultimately, INEOS would then have to lend the money back to Manchester United. So it would be debt in all but name.
Okay. Is there some magical third way that this could happen where we don't get a debt? Like, because people, we all talk about being debt free and all that sort of stuff. Is there another way, or is it just a plain fact debt has to happen and United are going to be in more debt than we were before in order for this stadium to happen?
I think it's almost inevitable.
Okay.
And what I want to say, it's not a good thing, but it doesn't have to be a bad thing. We've all got mortgages. Some people have got student loans. I owe money on my credit card, and I still survive. I don't particularly like it. I'd much rather have no mortgage than a mortgage. I'd much rather have no student debt than student debt. I'd much rather owe nothing on my credit card. But you simply adjust your spending accordingly. If I'm honest about the debt, I think it's become a very emotional issue where, in my view, the focus really ought to be on the absolutely appalling recruitment strategy that we've seen since Sir Alex retired. Manchester United have had a net spend of £300 million more than any other club in the Premier League since 2013. So, yes, Chelsea has spent more, but Chelsea have been really good at generating money. I know you're not fond of City here on the Paddock, but City have been really smart at bringing in the money coming into the club. And you look at the list of players that they have sold. Yeah. And so on a net basis, again, they're sort of £300 to £400 million behind Manchester United. This is the area that the club needs to focus on. The debt itself, it's a bit of a pantomime villain. It was a big issue in the early years of the Glazers takeover because the interest was extortionate, but the debt has been rescheduled. The interest rates have gone down. About half of the interest that we're seeing on Manchester United's accounts each year is actually interest on transfers, going back to what we were talking about earlier, that the club's bought loads of players on tick.
Yeah, well, that moves us on nicely to these comments and these interviews that Jim Ratcliffe did yesterday. He said United will run out of money by Christmas, or they would have done were it not for some of these extra measures that they've taken, putting up ticket prices, cutting certain services, cutting free lunches, cutting payments to former players and services down to the FA Cup final, things like that. What does that mean when he says United will run out of money? Because on a spreadsheet, we're already massively in debt. What does run out of money actually mean, do you think?
What I think he was trying to say, that they wouldn't have been able to pay the wages, that they wouldn't have been able to go and pay the pie suppliers, they wouldn't be able to go and pay for the hotels when United are playing away. My analysis of that is that it's an inaccurate comment. It's also a very inflammatory comment because if that was the case, then why didn't the New York Stock Exchange know? Why didn't all the shareholders know about this? Because he shouldn't be giving it as a flippant comment on an interview. And I thought Gary Neville did a really good job at grilling him on a variety of topics. I also don't think it's a very accurate comment as well, because Manchester United have signed players for £251 million in the June 24 and January 25 transfer windows. Well, if you knew that you were potentially going to run out of money in December, you wouldn't have agreed to spend that amount of money on player recruitment, because that's your biggest single cost. They wouldn't have agreed to pay £21 million to change the manager. They wouldn't have had all of the redundancy costs for Dan Ashworth and so on. So I think he seems very keen to spend money on big things and seems to be targeting small spend issues because they're a lot easier. He said it's a hard decision. Well, that's not the case. It's very easy to make people redundant. It's very easy to cancel the 50 quid for the steward of the match. It's very easy to simply say to staff that yes, all the players are going to get a lunchtime meal. But if you're at Carrington, you're not going to get one. And anybody that's been at Carrington, well, there's not many butty bars nearby. So it does seem it does seem a bit disingenuous. I think he's trying to justify these decisions which have been made by INEOS, because that's the way that they do their business. That they are ruthless. And to say that the club would have run out of cash by December is simply not the case. You've only got to look at Manchester United's balance sheet at the 31st of December. In the account, they had over £70 million worth of cash in the bank at that date.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I was reading before this about how INEOS, basically every company they've ever bought, they start with a wave of redundancies. That's kind of their model. So to blame that and to sort of nudge the 40 quid or the 50 quid bonus or whatever was to prevent us going bust when you were probably going to sack a load of people anyway. I do agree. It is. I mean, I'm deferring to your expertise there. It is disingenuous. Do you think then that all this cost-cutting stuff is unnecessary? Do you think any of it's necessary, or do you think that realistically the only way that we're going to save money or make money is what we do on the pitch? Do you think the off-the-field stuff is just what is that? Just an exercise of control, of I'm in charge, I'm the boss? Why do you think they do that if it's not really as important as they're making out to be?
Well, to a certain extent, it's a billionaire's vanity exercise, showing people that he is boss. Well, this is one way of being able to do it, having control over people's jobs. Could the club have had fewer employees? Yeah, it probably could. But I suspect that every single football club in English football, in Spanish football, in German football, could probably survive with fewer staff. We've just seen Liverpool announce their financial results. They lost a bit of money. They've got over 1,000 staff as well. And they don't have the challenges that some of Manchester United have in terms of Manchester United are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So therefore, they've got those additional compliance costs. Manchester United have got MUTV. If you look at the number of people that work in the media department, well, that reflects the fact that Manchester United are the biggest ticket in town. If Manchester United sneezes, then the rest of football catches a cold in terms of how big a story it happens to be. So therefore, you need a bigger media department. You need a bigger compliance department. You need more people potentially working in legal and in accounting, because you're now responsible towards the New York Stock Exchange. And all of that, I think, has been ignored. And it's also the fact that you've got natural wastage. People leave their jobs. So normally you'd be losing 10% of your staff on a yearly basis, and you don't have to replace all of them. I think he's made a big thing about having some form of lifestyle coach on 175 grand a year, but that's one member of staff. There's plenty of other people that and I know, because let's face it, we've been in Manchester long enough, who are earning a fraction of that and who are working, they've been working in scouting, or they've been working as part of the academy, or they've been working as ground staff, and they're on pretty low salaries, and they've now lost their jobs. It didn't need to be as extreme as it has been, but as you said rightly, Joe, earlier, this is the INEOS playbook, and I think what shocked them is that they knew Manchester United's a massive football club. They didn't realise that every single decision they were going to make was going to take so much scrutiny. And I appreciate Manchester United's got a very varied fan base as well, but United fans that I speak to in Manchester in particular, they're not happy. for all of the faults of the Glazers, and let's face it, we could spend 3 hours listing out all the things that the Glazers done wrong, to say that one of the things that they've worst at is creating jobs in Manchester. Now, about 5 or 6 years ago, Manchester United was the biggest private employer in Manchester itself. Well, that's something to be proud of. And Manchester United committing to paying the real living wage in Manchester, which they did under the Glazers, again, is not something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, and hopefully we don't see all of these things slowly roll back on, and maybe once, because Ratcliffe did sort of hint, didn't he, that maybe in a few years, once everything's settled and we're back in the Champions League and we're winning and we've got more money, we can bring the free lunches back. But I feel like it doesn't tend to work like that, does it? Billionaires do things and then they only tend to get tighter rather than, slacking off the purse strings a little bit more. But we'll have to wait and see. Kieran, thank you so much, as always, for coming on, explaining some of these things to us. It's a shame that we are going to have more debt in it, but like you said, if there's a shiny stadium at the end of it, maybe that will satisfy people. But get your thoughts in the comments. What do you make of this news? Thank you again, Kieran, for coming on. Cheers, mate.
All the best, Joe. Take care. Love to all at the Paddock.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us at home as well. If you haven't subscribed, please do. We'll see you in a bit.